listening to With Sports Radio's Locker Room Talk with Sara Gross and Kelly O'Mara.
Hi, welcome to the Locker Room, Kelly. So we're talking about wage inequality in cycling.
Right, in cycling specifically because it's so terrible.
Cycling is definitely one of the worst sports for wage inequality, so we decided to hit that first. And coming up on the show, we have Kathryn Bertine, who's been a longtime advocate for women in cycling. So we'll look forward to talking to her. But first, let's hit a couple women's sport news items here. Out of Florida, a high school girl, actually, this is a girls' sport, boxing. A young Muslim girl was not allowed to box in her hijab, and her competitor showed true sportswomanship, I think.
They're the boxing national championships down in Florida, and this 16-year-old girl from Minnesota, was ready to get in the ring, and they said, no, you can't. Wearing a hijab and like a shirt and leggings under is a safety issue. I'm a little confused how they let her get that far, because she's been boxing in like qualifiers and stuff, and I guess it's been a whole legal battle for her. But when they said no, her opponent came over and was like, oh, let's share the belt being like their championship trophy in boxing. Because, this isn't fair. You deserve a chance. And so then the organizer went and got them both a belt and they like shared it, which I think was nice. I mean, it's cute.
Yeah, it's a lovely story. I think, when you're involved in the conversation in any sport, there seems to be reasons in boxing why you need to see your limbs in terms of the rules. I don't know boxing that well, but I understand that was the issue. But I think sometimes these things, it's like from the mouths of babes in a way. Like sometimes a kid will have a better idea of what is right and just, and that might be the case here.
Yeah, I guess the competitor was like, why not just let her box? It's fine.
Right.
It's not a problem.
Yeah, she's got her head and her arms covered. It's okay. So our hype of the week, a kind of an interesting one. We have a new female record holder for reaching the South Pole. What does that mean? I mean, how does someone get the record for the South Pole expedition? You're my South Pole expert.
I don't know. I mean, okay, so she got the fastest women's record for skiing to reach the South Pole, which I guess is measured from a certain point, from like a bay, an inlet, once you hit land, to, the 90-degree south mark where there is actually a pole. They like put one there.
Right.
Though my understanding, side point, is that it's moved and where the pole is not technically where the South Pole. Right. But this is separate point, totally not relevant. And it took her 38 days and 23 hours to do this, to ski from Land's End into the pole.
Wow. I mean, it's an amazing feat regardless. It's one of those things that it's an amazing feat just to do it, and then to have a record in it is wow. So definitely worthy of the hype of the week. She is called Joanna Davidson.
She is called that, yes.
Yes, so good for you, Joanna Davidson. That is amazing, and you blow my mind. So from there, let's talk gripe, because I think you had a bit of a gripe this week, did you, Kelly?
Right, it's more of a frustration than a gripe. So as I'm sure happens to you, even though you're Canadian, people always are telling me, oh my God, you can't do that. Oh my God, you can't bike to there. And you're like, I was going to bike there and back. Like, I don't really know what to say to that. And so because this happens all the time to me, because everyone thinks what I want to do is crazy, I've lost my ability, it turns out, to tell what is actually crazy and unsafe. Because we've had a big storm this week and people were like, oh my God, you can't run in that. And I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know. I was swimming in a snowstorm last week and I was like, I don't know if this is unsafe. This might be unsafe. I have lost my ability to tell because of this.
Right. Well, because my obvious answer to that would be just to trust your own judgment. But it sounds like that's what you're starting to doubt.
Right. And I am going to guess that lots of female athletes have this problem, because everyone's always telling you, oh my God, it's unsafe to be running right now. Oh my God, you can't go hiking by yourself. What if you get raped? And you're like, yeah, that would be bad. Like, that would be a problem. Is that going to happen? Like, I don't know.
Right. I think, it is an interesting question that we probably are told that more as women, and how we understand all the factors and figure out how to proceed. I mean, but it is kind of just what being an adult is. I trust your judgment, Kelly.
You shouldn't. I've gotten in some situations that I'm like, this is not good.
So next up, we have Kirsten Toth is just joining us for a moment on the show here. She's a college hockey player from Vancouver, and she's increasingly becoming an advocate for women and girls in hockey. And we're going to talk a little bit about body checking in hockey, because apparently, I didn't realize this, but it is not allowed in the women's game nor for girls. So let's talk to Kirsten. Hi, Kirsten. Thanks for dropping into the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we recently found out from you, actually, that body checking is not allowed in women's hockey, but it seems to be such an important part of the men's game. Why isn't it allowed?
So there's lots of rumors. We don't really know the true reason as to why it's not allowed, but I think the biggest reason was the Olympics have two teams that are the strongest every year, and there's never been another team that has ever made it to the gold medal game, and that's Canada and the United States. So the IIHF, which is the International Ice Hockey Federation, decided to take body checking out of the women's game in order to let the other countries catch up to the skill level of Canada and the United States. I mean, it's never happened yet, but the body checking is still not allowed in the women's game due to that reason. But it's also rumored that the speed of the game would be slowed down if you incorporate body checking into the women's game. When you look at the men's game, body checking actually speeds the game up. So there hasn't been any research to validate any of these points, but those are kind of the two biggest reasons as to why body checking isn't allowed in the women's game.
So why do you think it's important to bring body checking back?
I think for what I just mentioned, the speed, I think it's definitely a tool that would speed the game up. And I think for the women's game, we've seen a lot of big improvements in the last couple of years with having a lucrative league in North America that is the first league that pays their athletes. So women's hockey players can finally make money playing their sport. And I think it's important to bring body checking in now more than ever, because it's not just the Olympics that is the highest level that you can accomplish. It's playing in a professional league where you can be paid. And I think now that we have a league in North America, the rest is irrelevant. You have players that are competitive and the best in their country, and I think we owe it to them to bring body checking back in. And then in the Olympic tournament, and that's once every 4 years, I think it's fair that if you decide to remove body checking for that one tournament, you could still have it in the women's regular season leagues every year besides the Olympic year. But also, we know that physicality is a big part and a big component of the men's game, and why people watch and why people buy tickets. So I think now that we are paying our female athletes, it's important to give them the opportunity to make more money potentially at what they do by adding that physical element into the game.
Right. So ultimately, you feel the game would kind of grow faster and be more lucrative for the women's professional side if they allowed body checking.
Definitely. And that is for the most competitive levels. Now, when we talk about the younger players and the less competitive levels, it's important to bring body checking into those leagues too. And that's because of injury reasons. A lot of people don't know this, but head injury is more common in the women's game of hockey than it is in the men's game. And there has been a lot of research and a lot of people have looked into this to figure out as to why that is. We talk about on our teams, particularly, we talk about that women were never taught at a young age. So young girls were never taught how to receive a body check and how to properly make a body check on another player. So if you're not taught how to hit properly, you don't know how to do it safely. And so the flip side of that is you have young girls who were never taught how to receive a body check, who are going into the corner with their head down, not expecting to be hit, not expecting the physicality, and in their body positioning isn't correctly absorbing the hit, and therefore, the injury rate is higher. It's going to happen no matter what, because hockey is a physical game. And so it's important for young girls to have this training, just like the young boys do, and to be taught properly. So I think that we're holding out on girls, and it's definitely not a fair part of hockey. So it's important to get that in the game.
Right. Well, thank you, Kirsten. You bring up some really great points, and we hope to talk more about hockey here on WISP. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Kelly, I can't help but think that there is a subtext to that whole conversation about body checking in women's hockey. it's not feminine, or it's not perceived as being feminine to body check. So therefore, we should not allow the women and girls to do it. And that's something she didn't really mention during the interview, but I can't help but think that somewhere along the way, that's been part of the subtext there.
Yeah, I mean, she did say that there's a lot of reasons people have said why it's not allowed for women as opposed to men. But there hasn't been a lot of research, and there has been some research. And I think the kind of fundamental problem what you're getting at is if it is unsafe, then it is unsafe for women and men, right? And if you're only banning it for women, then you are getting back to these fundamental arguments that are, we've heard in cycling, we've heard in running, that are like, well, the women have to be protected. The women, it hurts their reproductive organs to run that far. Well, it's not feminine for women to box. Like this has happened for centuries. This is not new. And it feels very unscientific and illogical.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the key point there is that Kristen feels that it affects the earning potential of now professional hockey players, which we have a fairly well-developed professional women's hockey league. And if that's going to affect their earning and their viewership, then it's definitely worth considering. And so when we're talking about earning, we should probably move now to Kathryn, our main guest for this week. She's a former journalist, a documentary filmmaker. She just retired, I understand, from her career as a pro cyclist. And she's been an advocate for women in cycling for a long time and is making huge efforts to make things better for women in cycling. So let's talk to Kathryn. Hi, Kathryn. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, we are good. I hear that you are newly retired.
That is correct. I kind of rode my contract out to the last date, which was December 31st. So I started off 2017 with the new retirement plan.
The new which I understand includes a very big new project.
Indeed, that does cross paths into the Homestretch Foundation, which is what I'm doing now, acting as the great facilitator of this new nonprofit. So, yep, correct.
Well, maybe you should tell our listeners a little bit about what the Homestretch Foundation is and kind of how it relates to this whole conversation of, women cyclists.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd love to tell you that. So the Homestretch Foundation, which you can also find online at the homestretchfoundation.org, will give you the rundown. But years ago, I had this desire to create something that could help women's cycling, but not just women's cycling, but really move all women forward in terms of equality, where we have this great kind of breach in the system of salary inequity, right? This is still going on, even in 2017, where women are being paid, 2/3 less than men. And that doesn't even include cycling, because in fact, professional cycling actually pays much less. But what we wanted to do with the Homestretch Foundation was find a way to alleviate the financial burden for women. And the way that we can do that, especially based here in Tucson, Arizona, is create a place where women that are pro cyclists and even pro triathletes, we even cater toward elite cyclists who are hoping to turn professional, and we can help them in their journey by allowing them a place to stay where they can live and train for free for up to 6 months of the year. Basically, between January and June, they can come to Tucson and do that if they apply through our online application. And then the other half of the year, between June and December, we have the Homestretch available where people can book camps, clinics, whether it's personal or private training and sessions, whatever it is that they do. And that on that side of the calendar, they pay to come and stay at the Homestretch. And what that does is it enables us as a nonprofit to allocate their funds so the other half of the year, from June to January, our athletes can stay and live for free. So that is the system that we have in place with the Homestretch Foundation. And so far, the exciting part is here we are in our initial startup phase, and we are already booked fully for January and February, and now half of March is even fully booked with cyclists and triathletes who are coming here to train and, kind of thrive in that nonprofit environment.
Well, it sounds amazing, Kathryn. And it sounds like, you're trying to create or basically fill a gap It sounds like in women's cycling, where to create an opportunity. And I'm just wondering, specifically, what is that gap? I mean, what is the pay gap? How much does a pro male cyclist make, and how much does a pro female cyclist make?
Great question. So back in 2013, the UCI came under recognition for this fact, which was that the head of the UCI at that time, Pat McQuaid, said that women don't deserve a base salary. But there has been a base salary in place for the men at the pro continental and higher level of roughly 35,000 euro, right? So we're talking about the level of pro cycling that is the top of the top, and the world tour teams, have this allocation of a base salary, and the women's teams do not. So somebody said, well, why don't the women have that? And back in 2013, they said, well, we don't think the women deserve one yet, or they don't need one. And even now in 2017, that hasn't changed. So one of the things that we're doing behind the scenes is fighting to make that change happen, because it's just a little bit crazy. Because what happens then, if the men are making a minimum of 35,000 euro and the women are not, what's going on is that a lot of women's teams are paying their riders so much less, even below the poverty line of many countries have a poverty line, and definitely these salaries are falling in let's say $10,000 or less for women to do the same job that a male cyclist is doing. So that's pretty horrible.
Why?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it is pretty bad. And my understanding is cycling is one of the more unequal sports out there when it comes to pay between women and men. Why is that? I mean, you must have firsthand experience, and people probably argue with you about this all the time. Why have we gotten to this point?
I would say I have both experience in that salary area and that people argue with me. Yes, correct. So, I can tell you that 4 out of the 5 years that I was a pro cyclist, I made well below the poverty level. And then 1 year I made just above it. And it was okay, but it was not leaps and bounds, right? So a lot of people, especially just, let's say, common knowledge in society, when you hear the word professional athlete, you are led to believe that, well, one, maybe you're wealthy, or two, you must be making enough to get by, right? Because isn't that what professional means? That you are clearly making your way financially in this sport, and that's such a common misconception that that's just not the case, and we need to change that so that it is the case, so that when we get to the professional ranks, at the very least, we are able to provide for ourselves above the poverty level. So yes, that is part of the thing. And then the other thing, I would say it's a big factor in the argument is, a lot of people will say, well, women don't necessarily need that base salary because, we don't even see the women on TV, and there's more of a market for the men's sport. So that's probably why they need more. And, the first thing I like to do is kind of smack that down.
How do you smack it down? Tell us your smackdown technique.
My smackdown technique is, well, first of all, anybody that'll listen to me babble about things that I talk about, that's, I'm just amazed in general that anyone will listen to me. So I like to start the smackdown technique with, okay, well, if you've got a minute, let's talk this through. But really what it comes down to with that mentality or philosophy that, the men have more of a platform where all we see is the men's sport. So yes, they deserve more. Well, here's the thing. The women deserve equally to men in any regard. We need to just put that out there. And if we're only seeing men's cycling on TV or in the media, we have to look at why is that, right? And we can talk about what we brought up earlier, talking about the idea of capitalism here is interesting. But we really only look at the men's side of the sport because that's the only thing we see. Why is it the only thing we see? That's the only thing that's being shown on TV or the internet or radio. Pick your media outlet, newspapers. But if we were introduced to the women's side, it would be, the best step forward, and it would of course be equal. Look at any sport. If we talk about running or swimming, for example, we see men and women are thriving in those sports in an equal exposure, media-wise. And we're not seeing that in cycling, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So what's going on is that somebody who makes decisions at the top is only choosing to put out to the world via media the fact that men are racing, but that women aren't, or aren't, doing the same or equal endeavors. So that's what has to change. And that happens in two places. One is in the marketplace of, let's say, media, right? So the bigwigs in TV and internet and newspapers, they're making a decision not to show the women. And why are they making that decision? Well, because of pretty much ignorance. They don't know that it exists. And if they don't know it exists, how do we change that? And that starts at the top of the sport. The UCI, the federation that runs cycling, needs to actually articulate and say, hey, the women are here and they're just as strong as the men. They have the same event potential as the men, and we need to show that on the media, in the media. So if the UCI valued us from that top-down hierarchy, then we would get so much further along. And until they do that, we really have a harder ground to fight the media side of it. So the media needs to know that we exist, and the top of the sport needs to show that, right? Because imagine if triathlon or swimming or running, if they only broadcast the men's race and not the women, right? That's where the message comes from the top of the governing body. Otherwise, the media doesn't know it exists. So that's what we have to change.
So it sounds like you're saying, I keep thinking of it as a circular, like chicken egg argument, right? There is an interest in women cycling because it's not on TV, but it's not on TV because there is an interest. And so it goes in this circle, and everybody uses that as an excuse not to pay women, right?
Exactly.
If you break that circle, if you do get coverage, have you seen then that there is the interest that then women, sponsors come in, women get paid more? Is that the case? Okay.
It is the case. And we have some small examples where we can show that. For example, when the Tour de France finally let women in to have a one-day event, the upswing of the media and how it was presented, and there were something like 150 countries that aired that coverage, and countless news stations were on board to show it. So we know that as soon as something that is introduced and it's promoted by the cycling federation that way, that people know it exists. So you're absolutely right. That's really, we call it the chicken and egg or the cycle, and everyone envisions that as a circle. Like somebody's got to get in there and disrupt that circular pattern. And in the half the road, we call it, instead of, just chicken and egg or the cycle, we call it like the pentagram of blame. How somebody's always blaming somebody else. Like the race promoters are saying, well, we don't have enough sponsors to add a women's field. And the sponsors are saying, well, we don't even know that exists. And the media is saying, well, we don't know it exists either. And once you trace this pentagram back, I've described it as a star, and you can see that in half the road, but it ultimately comes back to the top of the sport itself. So in this case, the UCI, just like everybody in sports, every sport has its top of the the pyramid, or if you want to call it a pentagram, whatever you will, but every sport has the top of it in terms of who governs it and how it works. And that is where the change has to take place. Because if you're not valued by the top of the sport, then you're only going to get so far in the trickle-down theory of what's important and what matters. So exposing the top of the sport is very important. And I believe you know something about that in terms of, 50 Women to Kona, in terms of equality. You have to go for the top of the sport. You've got to go for Messick. You've got to go for, all of the people that are standing in the way and make it valued and seen and appreciated there. Otherwise, it's going to be a battle.
Yes, absolutely. In For those who don't know, in triathlon we have our own battle because we have unequal numbers who for men and the women who get to actually participate in the world championships. While we do have equal prize money, unlike cycling that has probably the most unequal division, as we've discussed, division
True.
of money in of any sport. But Kathryn, before we go, you mentioned Half the Road there. If people are more interested kind of in the plight of the female cyclist, tell us how we can watch that.
Absolutely. So Half the Road is our film. It's a film that I wrote and directed a few years back, but it's not about me. It's about the sport. And you can download Half the Road now on, let's see, iTunes, on Vimeo, and on Amazon. It's available there, or you can even buy the DVD. And if you check out halftheroad.com, it'll send you to the right places for ordering all of that. So it's out there now to the world, and it talks about the struggles of women's cycling, but also we hope highlights the good, wonderful parts of women's cycling that need to be seen. So it's not just about struggle; it's about victory and triumph too.
Awesome. And I think too, in terms of, we talked about breaking that cycle, the chicken and egg thing, like Kelly said, your pentagram example. I think that a lot of people, if you're in that chain, you have an opportunity to break it or to help break it. So I think
Right.
as well as the top of the sport, the UCI, in our case, the WTC, the World Triathlon Corporation in our sport, I think also the media has an option and a choice too. And I think that's the option that you kind of tried to take with Half the Road is, okay, let's go to the media side. Let's show what's happening here and inform people.
Right.
And that's a good opportunity as well to sort of break that chain, I think.
Thank you. I agree. And you know what's interesting now that we're talking a little bit about media is that we have to remember that reporters that are out there doing their job in the media and going out and getting the story, that's only part of the battle. A lot of reporters are, well, some of them do look for creative angles and scoops to tell. They're often assigned a story by an editor, right? So whoever is at the top chain of command of any news source, they have to be the ones who are educated on what they don't know is even out there, right? And so many people now assume that, oh, it's 2017 and women are equal and everything's going smoothly, right? I mean, it's modern day and age. But a lot of these editors need to understand that they've got to start assigning their journalists and their reporters to stories which they might assume, since it's modern day and age, everything's great, but maybe it's not. Maybe they need to take a closer look at what truly matters in, moving this world forward, and stop resting on laurels that everybody's equal and things are moving along and progress is happening, and really start assigning some of their journalists and writers to stories that they don't even realize are still behind the times.
Oh my God, I've had those exact same arguments with editors. It is terrible. You go in circles.
Yes, they want happy sunshine stories.
So I think this has been like a really interesting conversation, and I think kind of let's close out by addressing the question everybody always gets to: what if there's just less interest in women's sports? What if we fix all of these things and they have equal coverage and they have equal prize purses, but we can't justify paying them more because they just are, there's just less interest. They're just making less money for sponsors. Too bad. Oh, well.
Oh my gosh, I love that question because it's so steeped in ignorance by the people who ask this, because they have this outdated notion of what women are physically capable of doing and performing as athletes. And cycling and triathlon are perfect examples to disrupt that notion. For example, in women's cycling, because so many women have struggled so hard in this sport, you should see the way that wonderfully impacts their physical athletic side. It is so interesting to watch a women's race. They're not just sitting around there like lollygagging on their bikes having tea. Like, they are absolutely going, gangbusters to the wall, and they have the most aggressive incredible race strategies and tactics, and they are just hammering and going for it. And this is also one of the benefits where some women have shorter races right now in cycling, but they are so much more aggressive, and it's really fascinating. When I say aggressive, I mean that in an athletic sense. It's just fascinating and interesting and fantastic to watch. And I would challenge anybody to watch a cycling race, a women's cycling race in this modern day and age, and to tell me that they're not, completely taken by how awesome it is on a physical level. It's fantastic. And the more people that we can educate to the fact that racing is something that's interesting to watch, and even more interesting now with women, because for decades it's just been on fire and fantastic to watch it in the most incredible thing. So I just, people need to watch it before they make a judgment that, oh yeah, women's racing, it's probably slower, or it couldn't possibly be exciting as a man's race. We can shatter that stereotype so easily just by having people tune into any women's World Tour UCI event.
Awesome. I love that. Kathryn, so just tell us how we can learn more about Homestretch.
Thank you for asking. Okay, so a couple ways. We have the homestretchfoundation.org set up. People can head there to check out what we're doing. And we just recently launched Facebook and Twitter and Instagram profiles, and they might be a little bit not slower now, but we just launched them, so we'll get them up and running and going. But please follow us there, and you'll see a lot more happening on those sites as well. But the website will tell you a lot more about our endeavors, and there's a couple videos you can watch about it now too. So it's all up there online.
Fabulous. Well, Kathryn, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing your thoughts about women's cycling. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. So we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and congrats with all you are doing to battle the triathlon front for equality there. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's, talking to Kathryn, a lot of things that play into women earning less than men. And so I guess the question is, Sara, did you feel like you earned less than your male counterparts when you were a professional?
It's funny you asked me that, because I've thought about this. I actually don't know. And and the reason I don't know is that we don't talk about these things. I've talked to a very small number of close female friends about how much they make on their contracts in various points during their career. I don't really have any points of comparison for a male athlete that would be the same, say, level as me at different points in my career, whether they were making the same amount. I don't know. So we have a problem of silence. Right, which is part of, the man is keeping us down. Who benefits when everyone's polite and doesn't talk about salaries? Absolutely. The man. Absolutely. I mean, that's why we're doing this podcast. So we can talk. But I do think, that's partially why it would take a really long time to make these changes, right? Is that even if tomorrow you started paying the same amount of prize purses, and you see this in tennis, right? They had this fight 40 years ago about equal prize purses, equal coverage, it's barely equal now, even though there's still debates. And now, 40 years later, the top paid female athletes in the world are tennis players. And that's not a coincidence, I don't think. Yes. It just took that long. Yes, exactly. And I think it's unfair to kind of say, okay, well, there's not as many people watching women's sport, or, you put it on TV for once or a season of 6, and then say, oh, well, not enough people watched, we're pulling it, when really it takes a long time to create that change. But that said, I think that there is an opportunity right now in the current market, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more people interested in talking about women's sport, more people interested in watching women's sport. It's very much a hot topic, at least in the North American context, and I think in Australia and Europe as well, from what I see. So there is a market opportunity there, and that's really what we need to focus on. Right. You could make the change and still make money. Yes, absolutely. So, and like Kathryn said so wonderfully, talking about the women's race and how aggressive the women are and how great a race is it. We see it, and back to your tennis example, as a lot of people talk about how they prefer the women's game because there's longer rallies, because so the women develop their own form of the game and people love it and they watch it. And I think that can happen across the board in all sports if the opportunities are there.
Okay. We have solved this problem. Now everyone just needs to listen to us.
Absolutely. So since we've solved it, I guess we should end the episode there. Thank you everyone for joining us in the locker room this week. For more women's sports coverage, go to wispsports.com. Check out Kelly's blog, Tri Talk, for all the insidery triathlon stuff that you will most definitely be interested in. And my blog, Offside, which I promise I will update soon. So join me, Sara Gross,
and Kelly O'Mara
next time in the locker room.